There's one thing I think we hold true with on this show, I like to think, is that today's topic with the good doctor here is something that we don't have a problem with over the airwaves here. And that's, basically the idea of how to have a civilized conversation with somebody you have strong disagreements with. There are people who appear on this show that I promise you I have strong disagreements with. But instead of blowing it up, we want to have a conversation. We want to hear what they have to say. We'll challenge some points, sure. But we're going to do it in a civilized way. We always have done that. It doesn't always happen, though, in real life right now. And in 2021 versus, maybe a decade or two ago with social media, it's been exacerbated. So how do we get about climbing up and taking the higher road? The high road. You take the low road. I'm going to take the high road. And is that high road worth the journey when we communicate with others? The good doctor is Dr. John Braccio. Dr. John B, of course, .com, the place for the podcast. As always, Regional Psychological Services of East Lansing, and he's with us right now. Good morning, sir.
Well, good morning to you, Dave. I do think it is worthwhile to always try to take the high road. I might add the suggestions we're talking about here are based on situations where there's not a risk of physical or emotional abuse, because in those situations you can't have good discussions. But I think skill sets that allow a person to have a civilized discussion with someone, you have strong disagreements, they're hard to find and develop in this world of the cancel culture, where we just eliminate someone we disagree with and never try to find common ground. And so I believe there are strategies that we can use to have a civilized conversation. And I might add that as a preface that personal disagreements do go back as far as Cain and Abel, so it's not like these are new issues in our society. Right. But I can mention a few of these here if it's okay here. Like I think we always respect the other person. That's critical. And accept your fears and concerns openly and honestly in your conversation. The person knows where you're coming from. Always respect the views of the other person as you present yours. Be open about where you got your information if arguing a point on research. Never use words like idiot, stupid, ignorant, imbecile in your conversations. This will quickly end the discussion and maybe the relationship. Sincerely show your understanding of the other person's position, even if you disagree. And that's kind of hard to do, but show you really understand the person. Never use sarcasm or pointed jokes that are meant to humiliate. That will quickly end the conversation. Never be a know-it-all, because conversations and relationships can end quickly with a know-it-all. Always voice appreciation. I think this is important. Voice appreciation to the person you strongly disagree with for the respect they've shown you in your conversation. So if you have a conversation with someone, they respect you, you respect them, this will lay the foundation for future civilized conversations. And never forget that you control what you say and how you say it. That's not the case with others. So I think that's a good framework for having civilized conversation if you can adhere to those, and hopefully the person you're talking to can try to do the same thing.
Can I add one to your list? Because that's a good list. Here's one I'd like to add to it. Have a genuine interest and a curiosity about what the other person thinks. A genuine curiosity, because it's going to take you, as opposed to, okay, I'm trying to figure out what's my next part of the conversation. You're going to be active listening. And it's hard to really be down on somebody else and uncivilized when you're active listening in a positive way, if that makes sense.
I think that's very true. And then when we're active listening, we're also trying to gather more information. This is how you feel, and tell me more, help me better understand this. I think that's true when you're actively listening, which is very hard for people to do, because people usually want to argue the point or make their point, or let the person know that's not how they see it. So I would say if you do, the curiosity, I think is a good point, and so that'd be a good one to add. I would agree.
Why does it seem like, and maybe it's just anecdotal, but I think this has devolved to a point where when I see people actually having a back and forth civil conversation, and it can be online, it can be in print without conversation, I look at it and it almost takes me off guard. I'm looking at it going, well, that's really they're both making good points, and look at how they're respecting one another. It's like they both went to kindergarten the same year and learned the same rules and had good parenting. But it strikes me as being the oddball thing in 2021. Do you get that same impression, or are we just conditioned to see the negative? Because I see a lot of that I'll see a lot of that today.
A couple of things. I think people are so conditioned to, in a way, just the noun, verb, object type communication that they have on social media, that I think they can be abrupt with each other. And I think people feel they're part of a vanguard or a huge group because of social media. So they're more than willing to not be willing to sit down and talk and have good discussions. They more or less have a set of views they believe. And this is why when you hear that certain networks, almost all the people that watch them, tend to vote in a certain way, it shows there's an echo chamber. And I think that transcends right to individuals, where people all of a sudden have a set of beliefs that they have, and they're not that willing to be willing to argue in a positive way or discuss them. We kind of need, we'll say back to the old days, where people could sit down an evening, have a dinner, just discuss and talk, and work things out where there might be disagreements. We are at a time where people are, they're hasty, they're in a hurry, and then of course during the pandemic, there's a lot of people that are under a lot of pressure, even if they're doing completely the right thing through the isolation, as much as, and following the rules as best we can. It does lead to a difficult time, but again, I do find this particular time, as I'm observing it, there seems to be a lot of intolerance in communication between people, and that's really not a good way. We really need to be more open. And back to the act of listening that you brought up specifically, that's, I think, a really big factor where we can listen to someone, don't have to agree with them, but try to fully get every possible understanding that you can pull out of the discussion with them, and don't use the information to attack them. Use it to understand. And I think another thing, too, there's not always one right way to do something. You can have 2, 3 right ways. One might be better than the other, but they may be equally good. And so there's not always just one way. And I think that's an important thing, because the know-it-all is very difficult to talk to. Like, well, only an idiot would do it that way, or the smartest people do it this way. So I think if we want discussion, we want to be mellow to some degree. We can argue our points, but we have to make sure that we're not overpowering and trying to dominate and control someone. There may be certain issues on right or wrong that we really have, that where there can be a real break between the person. I think obviously that can be in some extreme cases of politics. It could be in religion, it could be in politics, whatever it might be. But in most cases, people have to be willing just to discuss and be open and enjoy the conversation. A lot of times I talk to people that don't have good conversations with people. They find that they're abrupt, or the person they're talking to has views such differently. They don't want to go into certain areas of discussion, or there's anger, frustration. So I think we need to get back to a good talking society where we can talk, we can disagree, we can have strong feelings, but that doesn't mean we have to end friendships, or we have to steer away from all kinds of conversations because the person we're talking to is so set in their ways, because we do want peace and fun and enjoyment, and that really comes from good, honest conversation where even if you disagree, you can enjoy the conversation and respect the other person and their views. I believe that strongly.
I think that's a great point. What you said just about conversation in general. I remember, my mom used to call people when they would go to various parties. My dad, mom, she would mention somebody is a wonderful conversationalist, or so fascinating to discuss something. When she meant that, because even though in a light social situation, they could find something that was really interesting to get into, and no one was demeaned. In fact, it was considered an art form, Doc, to be able to move among people and converse high and low. You know what I mean?
Can I give you an example? Just came to my mind. there was a great English essay writer, William Hazlitt, back in the 1700s, and he was writing about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was a minister at one time.
Okay.
Who was a great poet, by the way. And he mentioned that he seemed to talk on endlessly. And you wanted him to. You wanted him to talk on endlessly, and I never forgot that, because he basically was praising Samuel Taylor Coleridge's, his ability to talk and carry on a conversation, that you just wanted him to talk and talk and talk. Now, I mean, not that he didn't interact with him or anything, but that's a compliment. If you
Sure.
meet with someone and and you're right, if they can talk to everybody and communicate, that's another separate skill, being able to talk highbrow, lowbrow, be able to relate to people of all different educational levels, all different backgrounds.
But I promise you, no one who can do that takes the low road. They're usually pretty skilled at taking the high road, and they've got a curiosity about other people and can make them feel good in a conversation, a part of it, maybe someone even more reticent, a willing participant. They draw them out. It's a very good, I don't want to say it's a lost art form, but I think it's not something that is as prized, and maybe it should be more these days. Civilized conversation, even if you have a strong disagreement. We have a lot of disagreements these days, and we like to put them front and center. But overcoming that, what a wonderful thing. The good doctor here, Dr. John Braccio. The podcast will reside shortly online. You'll find it at drjohnb, the letter B.com. Regional Psychological Services. Always good to converse with you, my friend.
Well, listen, thank you. Particularly, this is my father's. It would be his 125th birthday, so it's kind of another celebration day as we talk about conversation. A great conversation, as I might add.
One day after my dad's would have been his 83rd. So let's. I hope they're tipping one. Absolutely. And there's no going against me on that one or you. We're back here shortly. Thank you, sir. On the morning wake up, 1320 WILS.